Equity Mates.
I will say this about investing. Everything you do learn is cumulative. What I learned at 20 is useful.
Welcome back to another episode of Equity Mates, or should I say welcome, brave explorers, to Investment Jungle Safari, the podcast that takes you on a wild adventure through the dense foliage of finance and investing. With you, our fearless tribe of listeners, we'll hack through the underbrush of confusion and guide you to become a master of the monetary wilderness. My name is Bryce, and as always, I'm joined by my equity buddy, Ren. How are you?
I'm very good, Bryce. Good to be here.
Yes.
I think I only need one guess to guess what the theme was today.
What's that?
Jungle Explorers.
Yes, correct. It's a jungle theme. We're in a safari. If you have just joined us for the very first time and have confused as to the intro, we're getting ChatGPT to give us some ideas for thematic introductions on how it can present Equity Mates. And welcome, if you have just joined us, to Equity Mates and the journey of Ren and I as we learn to invest. And what an episode we have today, Ren. An interview that I thoroughly enjoyed and took a lot of inspiration from. And one that helped us get a different perspective on private equity.
Yeah, Brent Beshore, the founder and chief executive officer of Permanent Equity, joined us today. He has a fascinating fund, and he tells the story better than we will be able to here. But essentially, we talk about long-term investing here at Equity Mates. All the books we read, a lot of the experts we speak to are real advocates for thinking long-term. You know, markets move quickly, but companies change slowly was Emma Fisher's line that's always stayed with us. But when most of the experts we speak to talk about long-term investing, they're thinking 5 to 7 years. That's sort of the time frame.
Yeah.
Brent, he wanted to have a 50-year fund. Yeah. He got talked into a 30-year fund, but still, for some people putting money into that fund, that could be half their lives. We really wanted to unpack how that changes, that different time horizon changes your thinking as an investor. What matters, what moats are truly sustainable, how that changes your return profile. And we were lucky that we got to unpack it with Brent today.
Absolutely. Now, a reminder that we are licensed, but we're not aware of your personal circumstances. So any information on this show is for education and entertainment purposes. Any advice is general advice. But with that said, we hope you enjoy this conversation with Brent, because we certainly did.
And if you want to continue thinking about long-term investing, pick up our book, Don't Stress, Just Invest, all about long-term investing and what is enough when it comes to setting yourself up for your financial future. What is enough today to set yourself up with enough for tomorrow? So pick that up, Don't Stress, Just Invest, wherever you buy books. But with that, let's get to the episode.
Well, Brent, welcome to Equity Mates.
Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Now, before we get stuck into the serious part of the interview, we always like to start with a bit of a would you rather. So, would you rather have a pause or a rewind button in your life?
Pause for sure.
Okay.
Why is that?
Oh, you didn't say I had to answer the why.
This is true. That's fair.
Yeah, okay,
That's
fair
fair.
enough.
Well, hold on. Can I push pause? No, I said no. Yeah, I mean, I think that most of my bad decisions that I've made are the result of, in the moment, making the easy choice, not the right choice. And so I would love to be able to push pause and say, let me think about that for a second and get back to you. And
fair.
Hurt me.
What about you, Ren?
I like the idea of a pause button as well.
Why?
Now that I'm thinking about it, though, like you could just continuously rewind and essentially it could
have the same effect.
Have the same effect. So maybe rewind. I also love you could go mass rewind and you could go back to like 2008 and just
Bitcoin
leverage up and buy Bitcoin. So you know what? I'm going to change my answer. Rewind. And if I had a rewind button, I could just rewind and answer it the first time.
Yes, true. Anyway, Ren, let's get stuck into it.
Yeah, well, Brent, I think your answer about a pause button is very on brand because, we speak about long-term investing here, but you are a true long-term considered investor. And that's why we're really excited to speak to you. You are the founder and CEO of Permanent Equity. And we'll get into the structure of your investing, but you truly think in decades. And we're excited to unpack what that means and how that, I guess, leads to sort of different investments and different outcomes. But to start the conversation, we thought we really needed to sort of set the context and talk about traditional private equity and how that model works. So then we can sort of compare how permanent equity operates differently. So to start with today, can you just explain to us how your standard private equity fund works?
Well, as a disclaimer, I've never worked in private equity. And actually, after I bought the first company, a friend of mine said, "Hey, you did a private equity deal." And I said, "What's that? Really?" And I literally Googled private equity. So all of this is hearsay, since I've never worked at another private equity firm. But from what I hear and from what I can research, the traditional model is what we like to call the buy, lever, strip, and flip model. So you're levering up a deal using as little equity as you can, using as much debt as you can. You are typically a post-close going to strip a lot of cost structure out of the business, at least the traditional leverage buyout model. And then you're going to try to sell it really as quickly as you can for as high of a rate of return as you can generate. So by doing that, not only does it ring the cash register and do you get paid when the carry accumulates, but also it allows you to raise your next fund because you got to have kind of stakes in the ground that allow you to do that. So most private equity firms are going to hold an investment for optimally 3 years, maybe 4 at the most, depending on when you catch them in the investment cycle. So you got to think about it. Traditional 10-year fund life. It's going to take, call it 2-3 years, maybe even 4 years to fully invest the fund. So, and then you got to exit in that 10-year period. You may have some extensions built in, but if you kind of do the math on it, a 3 to 4 year hold's about as long as you can hold it. And oftentimes, if the right opportunity presents itself, the private equity firm will exit prior to that as well. So, I mean, I've got friends in traditional private equity, and some of the best deals they've ever done. It was, hey, 18 months later, we got this offer, and there it goes. So that's my understanding. If your understanding differs, though, hop in.
No, that is very much our understanding of it as well. So I guess the follow-on question then is, what do you consider some of the major problems with that approach?
Well, it's impossible to make good long-term decisions with short-term capital and a short time horizon. I could never figure out when I first started getting into this, why in the world you'd only want to hold a great business for 3 or 4 years. And in fact, if you talk to most private equity people, it's not really the companies that got zeroed out that they'll talk about as their worst investments or the biggest problem with the model. They'll talk about the winners that they couldn't hold. Every private equity person out there has, it's almost like an anti-portfolio. And they're like, oh man, if I could have just held that one and that one and that one. There's usually like maybe 1 or 2 a decade that they'll want to have held forever. There's incredible businesses. And sure enough, they sold them and they went to the moon after they sold them, right? And they may even passed. I mean, once you sold to private equity, usually you're either being bought out by a strategic or you're being resold every 2 to 4 years, kind of in perpetuity. So, it's a stressful thing on the companies. We also like to think that it's really difficult to develop great relationships when you're only going to work together for a short period of time. So it's easy to treat people as objects and not as the sort of the end. So treat people more as the means than the end. And we think that's just a really bad way to do life in general. So if you look at how most families made their money, obviously outside of private equity, very few of them were like, oh yeah, we levered up our company and then we tried to flip it to somebody else, right? No, I mean, typically how you make real money as a family, how most of these businesses got built is by typically using no debt, holding for a long period of time, serving customers and employees and the communities that they're in, the industry they're in, faithfully over decades. And so when we look at it and say, if that's how you produce success over a long period of time, why in the world would you flip to a completely different model and, interrupt that compounding not only of capital, but of relationships? Why in the world would you do that? And it didn't make much sense to us.
Well, that leads to Permanent Equity, which you founded in 2007. Now, can you tell us how you set up Permanent Equity to be different?
Yeah. Well, how I set it up was haphazardly at best. there was not a straight line of success. And I think that's one of the things I want to impress on anybody who's listening to this is, it was not like I got into a room in 2007 and said, okay, here's this big master plan for how we're going to tackle and sort of rewrite the rules for private equity. It's been emergent. And I think all the really good things are emergent. There are very few of them are designed. They kind of come out of nowhere, and they come out of nowhere in the sense of, you follow a path and then all of a sudden there's a fork in the road and you're like, oh man, that's an interesting path over there. I wonder if I went down that path, if things wouldn't be better. And, I've always said, just do more of what works and less of what doesn't. And so early on, I founded a series of companies, was an entrepreneur myself, and met a guy and he said, hey, you should meet this friend of mine. He just got left at the altar for the second time trying to sell his business. You should talk to him. And I took that to mean I should try to go buy it, because why else would you tell me that? He had no idea. He thought he was just introducing two people that were in the same industry and just kind of matchmaking from that perspective. And so as a snot-nosed 24 or 25-year-old, whatever I was at the time, I looked about 14. And I sat in front of this guy and said, hey, I want to try to buy your business. And he literally laughed at me. Like literally, it was like, what are you talking about? And looking back, I was kind of offended. I mean, my pride was wounded. I mean, I was like, look, I know I look like I'm 14, but can you just like pretend for a second, And so anyway, we talked about it, and ultimately, make a very long story short, bought the business 7 months later, maybe 8 months later, and bought it with an SBA loan. And so I had this really interesting problem, which is I just bought a business that was kind of roughly the same size as the business that I'd founded, very different than the business I had founded, but was sort of using similar skill sets in a very different tangent. And so it forced me immediately to be out of both of those businesses so that I could manage both of them. So I had no choice but to kind of start to build a super organization on top of those businesses. And so that's what I did. Very slowly started building. The investment went well. The other firm started producing cash as well. We actually ended up founding another business in the interim. Life's not a straight line. It's kind of squiggly. I'm really trying to impress upon your listeners that this is not a well-designed plan, if you can't tell. And it's way hairier than I'm even telling you. So then it was a matter of, okay, well, that worked well. I wonder how many other businesses out there need to sell. It turns out there's a lot. I mean, if you go back to 2009, 2010, which is kind of, when all this stuff was happening, there really wasn't a lot of literature out there. There was a little bit of writing out there, but not much on the internet. There was no like entrepreneurship through acquisition, community, FinTwit wasn't a thing. It was just kind of like, it's funny as that sounds, it sounds like the good old days, but it wasn't that long ago. But it was, there just wasn't a lot of information out there. So I just remember thinking to myself, well, gosh, there's a lot of people out there who, need to sell their business, and who else can buy them? And started researching traditional private equity. And especially at that time, really traditional private equity based on the 2 and 20 model, especially based on the cost structure and the way it traditionally works, it's really difficult for them to buy platforms. So standalone independent investments, not kind of bolting them onto something else, but standalones for really under kind of $8 to $10 million of earnings. And I was like, man, there's a huge chunk of really great businesses that I bet are between $1 million and call it $7 or $8 million of earnings. And so I just started doing research. Who was doing this? I went and talked to, well, really anybody who would talk to me. I got a lot of no's, by the way. And, most people I talked to were like, look, the way to do this is you buy one business at a time, you kind of dress it up, and then you sell it, and then you do this again and again and again. And there's guys who are like country club deal guys who have done this their whole careers and made really good livings. They provided for their families. They provided like nice service. They did well. That I was already past. Like I couldn't do that, right? I couldn't just focus on one business. I already had multiple businesses that, had started to create this superstructure. So I started asking them, I'm like, well, has anybody ever, done this at scale? And they're like, oh yeah, Berkshire. I'm like, well, that's not really helpful, right? let's dial it back a little bit. And there's like, oh, there's Danaher, and like it's very interesting that like the Danaher system. There's the Pritzkers out of Chicago that had done, sort of built, bought a lot of businesses and built up to scale. So I started studying a lot of those and really just trying to research the best investors of all time. So spent a kind of a period of time doing that. And it became clear that I think there was a path to it. I remember, sort of the aha moment of like, I think this is really something that I want to dedicate my life to doing. I love family-owned businesses. I love meeting people. I love the diversity that of people and companies. And I mean, there's so many different ways to make money. It's crazy. Literally every week we come across something where like, I never knew you could make money doing that. And some of these businesses are big. So that was kind of how permanent equity emerged. It ended up executing on, call it 3 more acquisitions after that with my own capital. My wife started getting very uncomfortable whenever I came to her and was like, hey, you know how we've been building up this cash, and why don't we take like all of it and put it into the next investment? And she asked me the question. She's like, what happens if any of this go wrong? And I was like, oh, it wouldn't be good. It'd be pretty bad. And so anyway, my poor wife. Yeah. So, and then in 2017 ended up raising a really unusual round of funding. It's a fund. It was our first fund, outside fund that we raised, but very unusual terms. I say unusual, it's unique terms is what we realize now. And then raised $300 million in 2019, and we're still investing out of that fund now. So, as I joked in my 2017 annual letter, we went pro, and it comes with a lot of benefits and it comes with a lot of struggles. And that's been a whole another story and chapter of how do you build and all that. So happy to get into anything you guys want to talk about, though.
Well, that's probably a good segue to raising that fund, because part of the reason for the traditional private equity model is that the people that are funding private equity, the limited partners, they want certain returns in certain timeframes, and they've got obligations to the people that they're investing on behalf of. And most of them don't want to lock up their money for 30 years, or they just can't lock up their money for 30 years. So tell us about raising the fund and I guess convincing some of these LPs that you were the right person to invest for what could be half their lives.
It doesn't make much sense that we were able to raise it, to be completely honest. And a lot of people that seriously, I'm not being falsely humble here. I look back on what happened, and it was an act of God. I truly mean that. So I met this guy named Patrick O'Shaughnessy. And at the time, he wasn't well known. He was just some dude who worked at a firm. And we connected on Twitter and had a few conversations. He was like, "Hey, can I come visit you?" Great, fantastic. If you want a vacation in Missouri, I always welcome that. And so he flew out, and we spent, like 12, 13 hours talking together. And it was wonderful. Like, we just clicked. And at the end of it, he was like, "Great, I want my family to invest." And I was like, "Hey, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bring you out here under false pretenses. Like, we don't have a way for you to invest. Like, we just use our own capital and recycle it. And that's the way things are." And he said, "Well, why don't you create a structure that you want and tell us what it would take for us to invest?" I was like, "Well, that seems like a challenge." And so went to the whiteboard for a couple of days and came back with basically the structure we have now. I presented it to him, and I was like, "There's zero chance that he would say yes to this." Not because it was punitive by any means. It was just, we asked for a really long time horizon. We wanted a completely different fee structure. We wanted to use no debt typically in the transactions. I mean, this is just like the opposite of traditional private equity. And he and his dad talked about it, and they were like, "Great, we're in." I was like, "Well, crap. Like, what now?" And he was like, "Well, we know a bunch of rich people. We'll help you raise." And I was like, "Great." It's kind of like the, Forrest Gump, if, he said, like, we invested in that fruit company, and Lieutenant Dan told us we didn't have to worry about money no more, and that was good. That's one less thing to worry about. And I felt like that. It was like, okay, well, great, you can help us raise, and fantastic. And so he and I actually hit the road together, and I mean, it's hard to describe how much he and his father Jim, changed my life and a lot of other people's lives. I never would have had the courage, the confidence, any of that to raise outside capital without them. And off to the races we went. We ended up raising $50 million in this weird structure. And a lot of people told us we were morons. And look, I am a moron in many ways. So like, I get it. I tell people all the time, I'm like, I know very little about a lot of things. I know a lot about this one specific thing, which is how to transition family-owned businesses and try to keep them on the rails and grow them. And so, when people would, these are professional investors that we were talking to in like Greenwich, Connecticut, and, these are big family offices, and they would ask me questions. I'd be like, "I literally don't know what you're talking about. Like, I'm really sorry, but like, I don't understand." And they'd have to I think it was kind of disarming in some ways, because I was like, "Hey, I will tell you what I know and what I don't know. And I will always raise my hand and say, I don't know." Right. And so a lot of conversations, and a lot of people said there's no way that our structure would work. Like, they had a lot of problems with it. And we said, "That's fine. Like, no worries at all. Like, we're not trying to push anything on anyone." And look, enough people said yes, and we started investing out of that fund, and it worked. The structure worked. The investors were thrilled, and we blew through the capital way faster. It sounds like reckless when I say blew through it. Like, we were shocked at how quickly the world opened up once you have capital. I mean, I guess a fool and his money are invited everywhere, right? But yeah, so we started investing that. We went through it pretty quickly, and then we ended up raising this 300 million in 2019, which was just that was a wonderful process. We've actually never gone outbound to any investor, so it's always been inbound. It's always been relationships and referrals, and so that helps as well. And we wanted to develop long-term relationships with our investors in the same way we like to develop long-term relationships with anybody in our system. And that certainly helped too. So yeah, I mean, like I said, looking back on it, it probably shouldn't have happened, but I think that we built something I'm really proud of. I think the incentives are way better than traditional private equity. We certainly love it. Our investors seem to love it, so pretty good.
What a story. Wow. So you mentioned Brent, some of the terms that you put in front of Patrick, and we're big fans of Patrick and the team at Colossus as well, so shout out to them. But mentioning that you don't want to use leverage and longer time horizons, what are some of the other characteristics or philosophies that you sort of embody in the investing approach that is different to traditional PE, to help us, our audience, sort of really understand? And then the second part of that question is, how does that then change the return profile compared to a traditional PE?
Yeah, there's a really big question. I could probably spend the next 20 minutes talking about that. So I'm going to try to give you as shortened version and double click on anything I say. So we asked for 50 years in the structure. We got whittled down to 30 years. So there's a 30-year lockup, which means there's no primary liquidity that can be demanded for 30 years. A lot of people, when we say that to them, they're like, "You got to be kidding me! Like, how does that even work?" And it's like, well, you give us your money for 30 years, and then at the end of 30 years, we can give it back to you. That's how it works. They still don't understand how that actually works because it's so foreign. So that was unusual. Our ability to not use debt, and I can talk about how the return profile is changed or maybe not changed, surprisingly, based on that. Yeah, and then our fee structure is completely different. So we take no fees of any kind, no reimbursements of any kind from the LPs to the GP, outside of we split cash flow as it's generated out of the portfolio, and we can talk about, if you want to, how that works. And so it's a truly aligned structure. Everyone from our investors, down through the portfolio company leaders and the leadership teams that we have, are all incentivized on the same metric, which is to produce great cash on cash returns over long periods of time. And so if there's a great place to put cash, the worst possible thing we can do is distribute it out. If there's not great places to put cash, the worst possible thing we can do is leave in the companies. So we're always thinking about, what is our hurdle rate? What is our opportunity cost? And should we send out cash or should we not? And so our investors are very flexible. They love it when we send them checks, and they love it when we don't send them checks, for good reasons, hopefully.
It feels like your story is also a real story in, I guess, curating the right group of LPs and right group of partners, and who are really aligned philosophically. Because I'm sure there are plenty of your peers who haven't had such a good experience with the LPs that they've got. But it sounds like you've been blessed in that way. Brent, we want to turn to investing philosophy, because we speak to a lot of investors on this podcast, and everyone will talk about being a long-term investor, but people are sort of talking 5, 7, 10 years perhaps, and you sort of reset expectations or reset the time frame when you talk about 30 years as a investing horizon. And we're interested in how that changes what you're looking for and how you think about a potential acquisition. So what is your investing philosophy? What are you looking for in a potential investment?
Yeah, well, maybe we could to go to first principles. Like, investing is merely just the assumption of risk, right? I mean, all investing, no matter what kind of investing you're doing, is just the assumption of risk. And so the question is, what is the risk that you're taking on? And in exchange for taking on that risk, what is the potential return that might be generated? So the way we think about it is, each company is going to have a different risk and return profile. And our job is to really think through what are those risks, and can we as an organization mitigate some of those risks that other people can't. And so there's some risks that we feel very comfortable mitigating. I mean, leadership risk is a huge one. We feel comfortable that we can recruit and retain really good talent better than typically what a small business family could acquire and retain. We feel comfortable with risks associated with balance sheets. I mean, we have a big balance sheet. We can back up that balance sheet pretty well. So there's those types of risks that we want to take on. In terms of what we're looking for in the companies, is to be in a durable industry. So we're not looking for fads. If we want to own these things for a long period of time, we need them to do something that we think is going to be around for a long time. So that's kind of the first test we put it through: is this company just naturally, or the industry they're in, going to be around in, call it 10 or 15 years? And by the way, we're not committing to holding these things for 30 years. And by the way, we have an option to renew towards the end of our fund life for longer time. So we can hold them longer than 30 years. And we're not forced to hold them that long either. I think this is an interesting split that we probably have with Berkshire. Berkshire commits to never sell. We would happily sell under some very specific circumstances. We can again talk about that, but we want to have the ability to hold it and compound for a long period of time. What does that require? It requires getting into a situation where all the stakeholders are in a win-win situation. So if you think about short term, you can have a lot of win-lose. There's a lot of zero-sum game that you can play. That's a very finite game. I would say, we want to get into infinite game territory. So the only way to have an infinite game is if all the stakeholders are winning for the long term, because people will figure it out. You're not going to win if they don't win. So if you think about all the stakeholders, we've got the employees, we've got the leadership teams, we've got permanent equity, we've got our investors, we have suppliers, we have customers, we have communities, and probably regulators, depending on the situation. That's a lot of stakeholders. So what we try to think about is, if everyone's sitting around the table, who's winning and who's losing, and for what period of time, and can we create a situation, or is the situation already the table set for us to all win together? And oftentimes the answer is no. It's just very easy. You go into a lot of these situations and somebody's winning, somebody's losing, customers are fleeing, or customers are only coming to you because the power dynamics are temporarily in your favor. So that's a lot of pieces to be set up. And then, look, the reality of buying a company is there's roughly 400 things you have to agree on between the buyer and the seller. So, you can imagine trying to set the table for that many stakeholders combined with agreeing on 400 things. It is a brutally difficult process. We look at a lot, we engage with a lot, and close very little. Luckily, over time, we've gotten better at what we do. I think it's the nature of wisdom, as you can accumulate it if you learn from your mistakes. And every deal is an opportunity for us to screw something up. So we learn a lot about what not to do, and sort of continue to add questions to our due diligence checklist, and try to refine our processes and line of thinking.
So Brent, when we often talk a lot about moats, and you mentioned Berkshire, and they're a massive, proponent for finding companies with long-term competitive advantages. But when you're thinking about, that 30-year plus time horizon, there's so much uncertainty at not only company level, but also a macro level. Really interested to understand what you think the true moats are that really stand the test of time, if at all, sort of the secret sauce, and how do you build conviction that a company really has it to withstand that period?
Well, so let's again go back to first principles on this. If a company is producing above average rates of return consistently over time, they have a moat. So we're only buying companies that have some sort of moat by default. The question is, how can it endure, and where does it lie? And oftentimes in the smaller end of the spectrum, what we call founder moat is the most common. So there's some force of nature, high intelligence, high drive, high willingness to sacrifice other areas of their lives to create success, a successful outcome. Those are the worst businesses to buy, right? Because those people are basically irreplaceable. In fact, we've turned down deals before where we meet the founder and we're like, you're incredible. Like, you haven't taken a vacation in 15 years. You're a machine. This thing is well-oiled. Everything's tight. There's nothing we can do to improve the business, and there's no way we can replace you. So like our returns are going to deteriorate over time, like no matter what. We come across other businesses where the founder's like, look, I've been burned out for 15 years. And like I go to Tahiti 5 times a year and I don't know what Bob does over there. You have to ask him, right? Those are businesses where we're like, great, if that business is successful despite an owner that for whatever reason, and and I'm not being judgmental at all. People can pick and choose. I mean, that's the nature of being an owner. They can pick and choose the lifestyle they want and where they want to invest their time and resources. Those are, ironically, better investment opportunities for us. And so we're trying to look for, those sort of mismatches in what opportunities we think can be pursued, what skill sets are already on staff, and then how do we kind of put all the puzzle pieces together to ultimately pursue them.
Well, Brent, we want to get from the theoretical to the practical and talk about some of the companies that you have invested in. But before then, we're going to take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. Well, welcome back to Equity Mates. We're talking to Brent Beshore, the founder and CEO of Permanent Equity, a really fascinating company out of the US who are true long-term investors, is what we keep saying, who are looking at investing for decades, 30 years plus. And Brent, we've talked about how you set up the fund and I guess some of the underlying principles or the investment philosophy, but we really want to turn to your portfolio. And so far, at least from what we could find, so far you've invested in 14 companies, a very varied group of companies, everything from amusement ride manufacturing to elite matchmaking. Bryce jumped on and tried to sign up for that after seeing it.
Not true.
So I guess...
Smart move.
So I guess let's start with such a varied portfolio. What do all these companies have in common?
Yeah, the thing that's in common is we believe that the thing they're doing is enduring in the need, and we love the leadership teams and the families that we were able to work with. So, everyone's a little bit different. Yeah, we have, there's actually 15 in the portfolio, but I think we only have 14 on the website. But yeah, every one of them has a unique story. I mean, it may look like the island of misfit toys, but there's actually a thread that runs through all.
Just for those budding private equity guys sitting at home or who are very inspired by your story, sort of, thinking through the challenges of what it takes to improve a business to the point of it being able to be sold for more than you bought or just generate incredible cash flow over a long period of time. What's the hardest part from your experience of fixing a business, or what's generally like the most difficult component to a business that is the part that is the most difficult to fix?
Well, if we do our job right, we're not buying anything that needs to be fixed necessarily. So we don't buy turnarounds. We're not buying things that are in distress. So we're buying healthy companies. Now, the healthy companies can have a lot that are maybe off or a lot of opportunities, low-hanging fruit to improve them. I mean, we literally had one company that we couldn't figure out why we weren't getting sales. And it turned out that the number that was posted to a lot of these places where sales were generated was going to a fax machine that was unplugged. Oh. And so we literally walked over and plugged in the fax machine and orders started coming out.
Oh, no.
So,
easy job.
There is some low-hanging fruit. We had another company where we couldn't figure out what was going on. The internet would go out and like destroy, a chunk of sales for the day. And it would take time to get the system rebooted and all the stuff. And we couldn't figure it out. And the head of IT said, "Oh yeah, I'm so sorry." We dug in. I couldn't get the extension cord long enough. So I duct taped the spike bar to the filing cabinet. And sometimes the duct tape comes loose and then the spike bar falls and knocks out the internet.
Oh my God.
We said, well, could we get a longer extension cord? And he's like, "Yeah, I could probably get that. Yeah, sure. No problem." So like there are opportunities, but those companies are profitable, growing, successful businesses. I would say, to slightly alter the question, which is what's the hardest part anyway, it's always going to be the people, right? People are messy. You're messy. I'm messy. Our messiness when it interacts is pretty volatile. And when you get a whole group of messy people together to serve another group of messy people and are being served by another group of messy people and, customers and suppliers, there's a lot of mess. And so I would say, with the size that we've grown to, that's definitely been one of the things is how do you spend the time to develop meaningful relationships? Because truly you can't go faster than the speed of trust. You have to have trust and you have to know that you can rely on people to get jobs done. And they need to be able to rely on us. Developing relationships, dealing with really challenging situations pretty frequently, and just trying to be fair and honest and kind. And there's always lots of opportunities to get upset, and trying to not do so, and trying to be level-headed and bring down the temperature, I think, is probably the hardest thing.
On that point, you mentioned earlier that a lot of your acquisitions have been family-owned businesses that are looking to sell, and the succession planning when it comes to family-owned businesses is always a real challenge. And then, if the family is selling the business rather than passing it down, I'm sure that at times that can get messy. How do you sort of deal with coming in as an external party and becoming in the middle of like these family relationships and succession challenges?
Carefully. Yeah, you're correct. It can be delicate at times. There's always dynamics at play. We just try to get to know people, and over time you get to know these situations that can be delicate, and we try to be good partners and try to bring down the temperature, try to create relationships, try to help foster relationships, and maybe relieve some of the strain and the stress. So quite often we are in a position to either exacerbate or help those situations. And we really just try to be a force for good in the families. Like we truly want these families to be successful. We care about them. And as you all know, you have families. Families can be hard. And then you add in a lot of money and a lot of pressure and a lot of stress and strain, and things can get volatile at times. So, I've had moments in my career where I've had a seller get very, very, very angry and call me bad words late at night. And I've had to say, hey, it sounds like maybe you've been drinking. Perhaps we could pick up this call the next morning and let kind of the dust settle and see where we go from there. And, the next morning is usually, hey, I'm kind of sorry for calling you at 11 o'clock last night and F-bombing you. Yeah, that's okay. There's a lot of stress going on. So let's move past it and let's talk about the thing itself. So, again, this was not me early in my career. I had to learn the hard way. And I think that, what I would say is I see a lot of highly educated, very driven people that want to get into buying and owning small to medium-sized businesses. And like I did, I see what's lacking a lot is a humility and an ability to diffuse situations, the emotional intelligence that I think it really requires. And so I tell our team all the time, we've got a great group of people who have all been operators. That makes us pretty different than traditional private equity. We actually won't hire somebody usually unless they've been an operator, just because there's no way to understand the stress and the strain and the pressure. Then wait till you get into it. And, I kind of laugh at it's every week that some Harvard or Yale or Stanford person contacts me and says, I want to, buy a plumbing business in Bemidji or whatever. And they're amazing. They're incredible people, but them trying to connect and relate and develop relationships is going to be really tough. And so some hear that and some don't, and some are successful despite it. I mean, look, life's weird like that, but yeah, I would say humility is a key that unlocks a lot of doors.
So we want to chat about the pace of investing, because it's quite notable given that you've made 14 investments across a time frame of 16 years since founding in 2007. Can you talk to us about the pace that you work at? Like, that feels like a very pleasurable pace to work at. But we're also interested in how you maintain a level of discipline when many of, I think, your PE sort of peers are moving at what seems to be an incredible pace.
Yeah, that's a great question. Maybe we're just lazy. I don't know. Days seem very full, and decades have seemed pretty full too. No, I mean, this is a question that we've gotten actually from potential investors, and the best way I can describe it is, buying one company is really, really difficult. Like, it's almost it's easy to buy a company. Anybody can buy anything. It's really difficult to successfully buy a company and to transition it and have it cash flow and have some sort of either hold or exit in which you can generate, sustained returns over time. Doing that with 2 or 3 companies is 10x harder than it is to buy one company. And then, I would say, it takes one pretty driven person to buy one. It takes a handful of people to really give it everything they got to buy 2, 3, 4. Building a system that can consistently acquire, diligence, document, and operate post-close new companies every year it's the hardest problem I've ever seen. And I know from the outside looking in, it's like, oh, this guy's got the tiniest violin in the world, and he's just making it sound harder than it is. Like, that's fine. Just wait till you try to do it. And so, to be honest, like, we were going as fast as we could. We were going at a pace that seemed like often breakneck pace. We just couldn't handle anymore because we were building our systems and we were building our team, and we were trying to create something that was long-term sustainable. I mean, I would say is if we're successful in 20 years, it was because we made choices, 5, 7 years ago that were good about how to build this. I mean, if I would have been given $50 million at the start of my career and said, go buy a bunch of businesses, like, I would have lost all the money, all of it. I just don't understand how. I mean, there are people who do that and they're incredibly successful. They're just way more intelligent than I am, and probably more driven. I just think that we were going at the pace that seemed correct to us, and things compound. Like, our pace of acquisition is also compounded. I mean, we'll probably put out the door over $100 million this year. That's a pretty good pace, and it's accelerating from here. And so, I think Jeff Bezos was said, if you see what we're doing today, really good decisions were made 5 years ago. And I feel like that's kind of where we are. Is we on the way up, you're always lagging, and on the way down, you're always lagging. And so it's always good to remember that if you look at careers, if you look at organizations, like, any snapshot in time is going to give you a false read on where the company's really going. Because if it's going down, like, it's going to look a heck of a lot better than it's going to be in a short period of time. If they're on the way up, they're going to look a heck of a lot less impressive than they will, in the future. And so, thankfully, I think we're on the way up. But it's nice. I mean, I got to be honest. Like, we in 2020 was a great example of that. We just raised this $300 million fund. We were pumped. We were excited. We were ready to get out there and tackle the world. Then this thing happened in 2020. People probably don't remember. We didn't. We didn't make an investment in 2020, and we felt great about it. And our investors loved it because they weren't paying any fees either. I mean, we got paid nothing for all the work we did in 2020 on the investment side, 0. And we were great with that. And so, that's the nice thing about our model. When investors have asked us, what's your rate of deployment? We're like, we don't have a rate of deployment. We can tell you what we've done historically. We can tell you what's coming down the pipe, but, like, we may invest all our capital in the first year. And they're like, what? You may invest all your capital in the first year. Yeah, if the right deals come along, like, we may blow it all. We may not invest any of it over a 5-year period. If the right deals don't come along, like, we're not a vintage of fund model. We just try to do good deals every single time and don't do bad deals. We've learned that, if you don't do bad deals and you do good deals, like, it turns out okay. And so we're relaxed about it. I would say 2020, 2021, early 2022 felt hard. Interest rates were really low. There was a ton of money from the government sloshing around in the system here in the United States. We were getting outbid for a period of time by like 50% on everything.
Oh, wow.
And these were not like highly competitive bid situations. These are like, there's 3 bidders, we're invited in, we're one of 3. And the sellers are like, we love you. Will you please work with us? And we're like, absolutely. Here's our offer. And they're like, that's half of what the other guy is. We're like, you should take that other guy's offer. So, look, all we can do, we never changed our underwriting to be more accommodating. We just said, hey, this is the only thing we know how to do is do good deals. And we haven't moved our bar back down since then. We've just always kept it the same. So That's a long-winded way of saying, I don't know if we have patience or not. We just try to, again, do good deals and not do bad deals.
Have you really seen the competitors' valuations come back in the last sort of 6-12 months?
Yeah, it's amazing. As a friend of mine who works in traditional private equity told me somewhat desperately, I talked to him probably 5 months ago, and he was really in the dumps. He was like, this is hard for me. He said basically no private equity deal that's been done in the last 3 or 4 years pencils out right now. Like none of them pencil out. And so there's a whole lot of people sitting on marks that are unrealistic right now. And there's a lot of people that are still kind of doing deals under the old model. And they're hoping that interest rates come back down and, causing the asset values to inflate back up. Because if you buy a business right now and you're, where debt is and how everything works, I mean, you got a lot of work to do to pay traditional prices. And so, yeah, but we're doing fine. We're not using debt in our transactions typically. So like, it doesn't matter to us. And so we've just stayed the same, and everyone else got a lot more excited about paying up for businesses 2020 to 2022. And now they're a heck of a lot less excited. And so we've gotten more competitive by not doing really anything differently.
Yeah. Well, Brent, we have run out of time, unfortunately, because there's so much more that we'd love to ask you about. But we do always like to end with the same or similar final question. Every year we hold an Expert of the Year or Guest of the Year award, and it's really just our chance to celebrate all the experts that have come on the podcast and given us their time and shared their knowledge. So as a guest of Equity Mates, you're automatically in the running. For the Equity Mates community who will get to nominate and vote at the end of the year, we're not big private equity investors, most of us. Most of us are small dollar everyday investors looking to build wealth over the long term. Most of us have the opportunity to invest in public markets, not private businesses. So, to close out as your final pitch for the Expert of the Year award, what can we as everyday investors learn from your approach, and what advice do you have for us that we can take and adopt in our investing lives?
Yeah, I'd say you're just screwed, and I would index if I were you. Is that going to win me an award?
Nice.
No.
Most likely.
Brutal honesty.
Exactly. No. I'm just joking. Actually, my friend Ian Castle and I, he's a great friend, and obviously Ian does a lot of small cap investing in the United States. He and I have had a lot of conversations about how public and private investors in the lower end of the market are very similar to one another. And he and I have great conversations. He's a way better analyst than I am in terms of analyzing opportunity. He obviously only has really kind of two ways to interact with the market, which is to poke the buy button and poke the sell button. I have a tremendous amount of levers. Now, believe me, he's suited to that. I would never be suited to that. If I could buy and sell, I probably would have bought and sold each one of our companies 1,000 times since we originally bought them. Right. I don't have the fortitude. It's quite a roller coaster if you really know what's going on. I mean, I joke that all businesses are loosely functioning disasters, and some happen to make money. And if you really understand the inside of these businesses, it is really true. If you don't think that they're messy, then you just really don't have a good view. And so, I guess my encouragement to if you want to be a professional investor, if you don't want to index. Which, by the way, I think indexing is a really great thing for a lot of people to do. The money that we've set aside for my 3 daughters, like we have them in an index, like because I don't want to be in the public markets. That's not my expertise. So, if you do want to be active and not index, I would encourage you to buy fewer companies and really know them inside and out. That's one of the things that I love about it, how Ian runs things. It's a very concentrated portfolio. And, I can't remember if it was Munger or Buffett. One of those guys was like, look, like, buying a basket of, highly diversified of a lot of these things, it's not going to generate outsized returns. And in fact, it's going to generate, very little returns, maybe even poorer returns than an index. And you're going to spend all your time doing it. I mean, if you actually calculate the amount of hours you put into it, like maybe you're making minimum wage, but probably not much more, right? So the only way that you have a shot at really, getting paid for the time that you're putting in, and I know a lot of people do it for the love of the game as well, which is great. And by the way, I love the game, right? But I would say is just really getting to know the companies, call people up. Like you'd be surprised at who will pick up the phone, like reach out, try to understand the competitors, try to understand how they're making decisions. How are they hiring? What's the culture? I mean, these are all the things, we have this 26-page single-space checklist that we go through on every one of our companies. I'd encourage you to develop a checklist like that you're really trying to understand these companies inside and out and get nitty gritty. Of course, read everything, listen to everything that the leadership's saying, read all the press releases, read the marketing emails, sign up for everything. That's when you're really going to know the companies, because at least in my world, you can see when things start to crack. It's not hard to see. You just got to pay attention. And so if you get into investment, the nice thing about the public markets is you get into investment, you don't like it, unless it's obviously very thinly traded, you should be able to poke a sell button and get the heck out of there, right? If you can see it coming. So I feel like that just paying attention, being up to date, taking it seriously, which it sounds like, your audience does. Probably doing the right things.
Well, great way to end there, Brent. 26-page single-space checklist. Would love to see that, but we'll leave that for another time. We do certainly appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your time with the Equity Mates community. If you'd like to follow more of what Brent does, or probably one of the best places is actually his X feed, formerly Twitter, Brent Beshore. He has a lot of great stuff on there, and you can join the conversation with him if you're interested. But Brent, thank you so much. We do really appreciate it. Found that interview truly fascinating. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I really appreciate you having me on. And if I can ever be helpful to anybody, have them reach out. Feel free.
You have been listening to an Equity Mates Media production. In the spirit of reconciliation, Equity Mates Media acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. This podcast is intended for education and entertainment purposes. Any advice is general advice only and has not taken into account your personal financial circumstances, needs, or objectives. Before acting on general advice, you should consider if it is relevant to your needs and read the relevant product disclosure statement. And if you're unsure, please speak to a financial professional. The hosts of this podcast and their guests may have positions in the companies mentioned. Equity Mates Media operates under an Australian Financial Services Licence 540697.